Voices from the Vault is brought to you by the Shelter Island Historical Society. This story was researched, written, and read for you by Mariah Moore. In the summer of 1743, William Havens built a house. There was nothing special about this house that was of traditional salt box style and 6 rooms large. It had windows and doors and a large fireplace for warmth and cooking. It had stairs and a roof and wooden floors cut by hand, as all wood was in 1743. It sat on 1,000 acres, a perfectly respectable plot of land to live and farm on, but not extraordinary. Despite all these mundane qualifications, this home was special to William Havens because it was his. A home for himself and his wife and their many children to live in and work in and pass down through the generations. Not long before William finished his home, his wife gave birth to their eldest child. On a cold day in mid-February, Sarah Havens brought her firstborn into the world, James. She had 8 more children, all in her home on Shelter Island, 7 of whom lived to adulthood. As eldest son, much would have sat upon James's shoulders, as many eldest children can sympathize today. It would have been James who helped his father hunt and chop wood as soon as he was strong enough, helping bear the burden of a home on a rural island in the 1740s and 50s. James would have explored the forests around his home to find caches of edible mushrooms, and dug in the sandbars at low tide to find scallops and clams. As he grew, he would have been expected to marry a nice island girl, start a family, and continue farming the land his father gave him to work. And it seems that James did all these things. He married Elizabeth Bowditch, a distant relative through his mother's side, and part of an important island family. 2 years before his father's death in 1763, the newlywed James and Elizabeth moved into James's childhood home and became the second family to fill the halls of this little house. James and Elizabeth named it Heart's Ease and built onto it 2 more rooms to accommodate their blossoming family. Their home also acted as the island's general store. They sold dry goods such as wheat flour, supplies like iron nails and bolts of cloth, and luxury items from rum to silver buckles. Island patrons paid most often via a barter system, though James's wealthy cousin Nickel sometimes paid with coins. The island's original human inhabitants, the Manhansett people, still lived on the island, and they too came to the Havens store to buy, most often, rum and molasses, the only things they desired that they could not find, hunt, or make themselves. Records indicate that Manhansetts usually paid with fish or baskets, while white settlers paid more often in crops, animals, or work. Sometimes an islander would come to the Havens store for a dram of rum, a bolt of wool, and 3 pounds of sugar, and pay for these with the promise of 2 days of work for the Havens family farm and a spool of thread spun by their wife after the sheep are shorn next month. James and Elizabeth were prospering. And then war came. Part of the impetus for the Revolutionary War was the increased presence of redcoats. These sailors and soldiers were ever lurking, moored off of Shelter Island as early as 1775, and they ravaged the little spot of land for many of their needs. After one of these raids, James joined the New York Provincial Congress as a delegate for Suffolk County. There, James participated in monumental and history-making discussions and votes, through which New York began to prepare for war with the British Empire. When the 13 British colonies in North America declared independence, Long Island was quickly captured by the Redcoat forces, Shelter Island included. Hundreds of Long Islanders fled their now occupied home and sought refuge in Connecticut. James, Elizabeth, and their children were among these refugees. However, they did not remain in Connecticut for the entirety of the war. and James had returned to Shelter Island by 1778, at which point he resumed his role of town assessor, a title he had held on and off for over a decade. Shelter Island was occupied by the English for 6 years. But when she was free of her unwelcome visitors, island life resumed as it was. Because of Shelter Island's small population and James's evident prominence within the town, he held many roles in town government from when he was only 23 years old until he was 58. He acted as assessor, a role that still exists, to assess the value of land for tax purposes. He and Benjamin Nicol together were commissioners to build a pound, and then, a few years later, James wore the mantle of Pound Master. Pound Master is an odd role to our modern ears, but it is similar to that of Animal Control Officer, though more often called in for escaped sheep or wandering cattle than for stray dogs and drunken raccoons. James, as Pound Master, would impound lost domestic animals for their owners to retrieve by paying a fine to the town. James also held the post of Overseer to the Poor. Given Shelter Island's size at the time, this role was likely not a very heavy burden to bear. Nonetheless, James would have had to calculate how much was needed in poor relief, and then enact the poor rate, a tax that was used to provide for the less fortunate of a given parish, and which was highly variable, given it was based on number of qualifying poor and how great their need was. And then he would distribute these funds fairly. Had Shelter Island been home to a poorhouse, that too would have fallen under James's purview. Overseer of the poor was an unpaid role, unlike those of Pound Master and Assessor. Later, in 1783, under an emergency session following the unexpected death of town supervisor and James's cousin, Nicol Havens, James was elected town supervisor, and he held that role for less than a year before setting it aside to resume his assessor duties. James Haven is often referred to as Captain James, a title found only on a statement of his death. Some believe he was a privateer during the Revolution and captain of the J, but that was in fact his cousin, William Havens. Others posit the reason for his title is that it was military, captain being a rank earned in the Suffolk County militia, but there is no record of James Havens being in the Suffolk County militia, and he was only in Connecticut for 2 years, so his joining the militia there is unlikely. So why was James Havens a captain? We simply do not know with any certainty. James, captain or not, died at age 68, passing heart's ease on to his son Henry, and was buried in the Presbyterian Cemetery here on Shelter Island. The Havens family was one of a few dozen families on Shelter Island for centuries, until the island's population began to expand and gain a claim to some famous last names. One of those early famous names left his mark behind on our island, and it remains 100 years later in the area name Ward's Point. But that's a story for another day.